Hello and welcome to week 9 of EAC214. This week, we are going to explore something that many writers experience but rarely talk about openly: resistance. Resistance can appear in many forms when we write: hesitation, procrastination, frustration, or the feeling that we simply don't want to start. In reflective writing especially, resistance is very common because writing asks us to slow down and examine our thoughts more closely than we usually do in everyday life. At the same time, writing through difficulty can build resilience. When we continue writing, even when the process feels uncomfortable or uncertain, we begin to develop confidence and trust in our thinking. Before we begin, I want you to think about the last time writing felt difficult. Maybe you started at the page longer than expected, or maybe you kept putting it off. That experience is more common than you think. And today we are going to explore why resistance is actually a normal and meaningful part of the writing process. In this module, we will explore what resistance looks like, why writing can feel difficult, and how resilience develops through sustained reflective practice. Let's begin by looking more deeply at what resistance actually is. Before we dive deeper, let's briefly look at the main goals for this week. First, we will examine what resistance looks like in the writing process. Many students assume that difficulty means they are doing something wrong. But in reality, resistance is a normal part of reflective work. Second, we will explore resilience, not as a dramatic transformation, but as the gradual ability to stay engaged with challenging thoughts and experiences. Finally, we will begin to recognize difficulty itself as part of intellectual and personal growth. Writing is not always smooth or comfortable, and this week encourages us to see that challenge not as failure, but as a part of the process. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the concept of resistance. What is resistance? Resistance refers to the hesitation or discomfort we sometimes feel when approaching writing. It can appear in different ways. Sometimes it shows up as procrastination, putting off writing even though we know we should start. Other times it appears as boredom, distraction, or the feeling that we don't have anything meaningful to say. In reflective writing, resistance often appears because the work asks us to look inward. It asks us to examine thoughts, memories, and emotions more carefully than we usually do. Importantly, resistance is not a sign of failure. In fact, many experienced writers recognize resistance as a signal that the work they are doing actually matters. To understand this more clearly, let's think about why writing can sometimes feel difficult in the first place. Writing can feel difficult for several reasons. One reason is that reflection slows down our thinking. In everyday life, we move quickly from one task to another without fully examining our thoughts or reactions. Writing interrupts that speed and forces us to pause. Another reason is that reflective writing can bring uncertainty to the surface. When we try to articulate our experiences, we sometimes realize that we don't fully understand them yet. Finally, writing can sometimes bring emotions to the surface. This doesn't mean that writing has to be dramatic or deeply personal, but reflection often touches on parts of our experience that we usually move past quickly. Because of this, difficulty in writing is often a sign that meaningful thinking is taking place. And this leads us to the idea of resilience in writing. Resilience in writing doesn't mean producing perfect work or having immediate insight. Instead, resilience means staying present with the writing process even when it feels uncertain or uncomfortable. A resilient writer continues working through moments of hesitation, confusion, or doubt. Rather than avoiding the page, they remain curious about what might emerge if they continue writing. Over time, this persistence builds confidence. Writers begin to trust that even incomplete thoughts or uncertain ideas can eventually lead to deeper understanding. Resilience, therefore, develops gradually through practice. But it's important to remember that writing doesn't always need to lead to clear conclusions. One of the most common mistakes in reflective writing is trying to force insight too quickly. Students sometimes feel that every journal entry must end with a lesson or a clear realization. But meaningful reflection doesn't always work that way. Sometimes writing simply reveals questions. Sometimes it reveals confusion or uncertainty. And sometimes the most valuable insight comes from observing small details rather than dramatic conclusions. Reflection is a process, not a performance. Allowing space for incomplete understanding can actually lead to more honest and thoughtful writing. However, while writing encourages reflection, it is also important to maintain healthy boundaries. Reflective writing doesn't mean that writers must disclose everything about their personal lives. Each writer has the right to decide what they want to share and what they prefer to keep private. In fact, maintaining boundaries can make writing more sustainable. When writers feel safe controlling their level of disclosure, they are more likely to engage with the process over time. Reflection is about examining ideas and experiences, not about exposing personal details for their own sake. Writers should therefore approach reflection with both honesty and self-respect. As we continue writing throughout this course, we will also begin to notice patterns in our writing process. Over time, writers often notice that resistance appears before moments of insight. When we struggle with a topic, it's often because the issue is complex or meaningful. The difficulty signals that we are encountering something worth thinking about more deeply. Through continued writing practice, patterns begin to emerge. Writers notice recurring themes, questions, or perspectives in their work. Gradually, resilience develops. What once felt intimidating begins to feel manageable. By staying present with the resistance rather than avoiding it, writers expand their ability to think, reflect, and communicate with clarity. And this process, writing through difficulty, is one of the central goals of reflective practice in this course. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next module.